Welcome to another story made by Oracle 1. In the small town of Elmswood, where fog clung to the streets like a suffocating blanket and shadows seemed to breathe with a life of their own, there existed a tale whispered in hushed tones by the older residents. It was the story of a mailman named Edward Grayson, who had died almost 6 decades ago yet was said to still deliver letters. Not just any letters. Those bearing ominous messages that foretold with uncanny accuracy the recipient's death. Edward Grayson was once a fixture of the community. Tall and gaunt, his uniform always crisp, his cap pulled low, he knew every street, every dog's name, and every face. But his life ended abruptly in 1963 when a freak accident claimed him while on duty, an accident so strange, some said the very act of delivering mail had somehow tethered him to this world. After his death, an unsettling legend began to take root. People started receiving letters from Edward, even though he was firmly confined to the past in the town's collective memory. The first known report surfaced in 1970, when old Mrs. Warren, a woman who had lived through 2 world wars, found an envelope in her mailbox. The stationery was yellowed, the handwriting crisp and unfamiliar. The letter inside contained a chilling note. "Mrs. Warren, your time is drawn near. Beware the clock that never strikes." Ignoring it as a cruel prank, she shoved the letter inside her coat pocket. That night, as the grandfather clock in her parlor struck midnight, its bell jammed halfway, a splintered plank in the floor gave way beneath her fragile feet. Mrs. Warren fell, hitting her head on the jagged wood below. Though she survived the fall, her days were numbered, and just 4 weeks later, she was found in bed lifeless, her face frozen in a mask of terror. Following that incident, stories gained momentum and spread like wildfire. In 1984, a young man named Daniel Peters, always a skeptic of ghost stories, encountered the myth firsthand. He had recently moved to Elmswood for a fresh start after a messy divorce. One morning, his mailbox held a letter unlike any other. The paper yellowed and worn at the edges, ink thick and black. The letter simply read, "Daniel Peters, your final hour comes at dawn. The road you take will end in fire." Confused and unnerved, Daniel crumpled the letter and tossed it into the trash. He went to bed with a restless mind, only to be woken before dawn by the distant sound of sirens and the acrid smell of smoke drifting through his window. Peering outside, he saw the house across the street engulfed in flames, the road leading to his own home suddenly barricaded by fire trucks. Daniel heeded the warning, taking a different route to work the next day. Weeks later, the house behind his blocked road burned beyond repair, but no one was hurt. When he told people of the letter, his story was met with looks of disbelief or veiled fear. He kept the letter, tucked safely away in an old box in the attic. The tales of Edward Grayson became infamous among Elmswood's residents, passed down from generation to generation. Yet no one knew precisely how or why Edward's spirit lingered. Some believed he was cursed, bound to the task of delivery until the last letter was sent. Others thought he was the harbinger of death itself, a spectral postman who ensured that fate arrived in the form of his warnings. For years, the letters were dismissed as folklore, until the disappearance of Elisa Carmichael in 2002. Elisa was an investigative journalist, a woman with a taste for the unusual. When she moved into Elmswood to write about its ghost stories, she found what she thought was the perfect break: a dusty mailbox that no longer seemed to serve any purpose. On her second day, a letter arrived. Addressed simply with her name, no return address, and written in the stark black ink with that same unsettling looped handwriting Edward had been known for. The letter: "Elisa Carmichael, the last story you seek will close the chapter of your life. Trust no one." For 3 weeks Elisa investigated, chasing leads about Edward Grayson, the mailman with an impossible legacy. The townsfolk grew wary around her, secretive and evasive, unwilling to talk. One evening, Elisa found herself trapped in Elmswood's neglected cemetery. After dark, the gates seemed to close behind her. Shadows writhed between tombstones, and a cold breeze whispered words in the ethnicity of Edward's era. From the darkness, footsteps approached, soft but deliberate. A shape emerged, dressed in a faded mailman's uniform, cap pulled low so that his eyes were hidden. His mouth curled into a hollow smile as he extended a hand holding a letter, the final warning. Despite Elisa's desperate attempts to escape, she never left Elmswood. Weeks later, her apartment was found in shambles, the letter clutched in her hand. Its contents predicted the precise manner of her demise, an automobile denied by a blind curve. Days later, news broke of Elisa's fatal crash on a stretch of road winding through the forests just outside Elmswood. The entirety of the community seemed paralyzed by fear. Even the police, normally dismissive of ghost stories, began filing reports of mysterious letters appearing in mailboxes with no rhyme or reason. People who received these letters spoke of a cold dread, a paralyzing certainty that death stalked their every step. Among the victims was Thomas Reed, a grizzled veteran who had served in Korea. His letter read, "Thomas Reed, the battle never ends in the place you once called home." 2 nights after reading the letter, he was found dead in his house. A fire that consumed everything except for the letter, which lay atop his ashes, pristine as ever. The letters seemed to circumvent normal reality, arriving with perfect timing. There were never fingerprints, never stamps, no origin. Just Edward's signature black ink and his ever-watchful eyes. Then came Emily Lawson, a young woman who had grown up in Elmswood but left town to escape the shadow of the mailman legend. Returning after her mother's death, she received her own letter 27 years after Edward's death. The letter was hauntingly precise, beginning with, "Emily Lawson, the child you never met awaits you beyond the veil. Your fate is sealed in the silence of forgotten secrets." This was peculiar, as Emily had no known children. Frightened and desperate, she sought answers in her family's history, uncovering a secret that chilled her to the bone. A baby she had given up for adoption decades before, one whose fate was a mystery. As she delved deeper, the feelings of being watched turned into dread when one night the mail slot clanged down with the sound of a letter landing inside her home. This time left on her doorstep, no longer in the mailbox but firmly placed as a warning. Ignoring it was no longer an option. Emily decided to confront the legend of Edward Grayson. She reached out to the town's oldest resident, Agnes Monroe, a woman who had personally survived several encounters with the mailman's letters. Agnes explained to Emily that Edward's curse was tied to his final day. On July 14, 1963, Edward had been delivering mail along the Old Oak Road. But that day, a tempest had descended upon Elmswood, ripping through wires and trees alike. Edward's horse-drawn cart was struck by lightning, and he collapsed, dead before he hit the ground. It was said that he was trying to deliver one last, vital letter when he died. Emily then discovered something deeper, that the mailman's curse was not about death itself, but about unfinished business. Each letter was a final message, a chance for one last connection before the end. Those who ignored the letters sealed their fates sooner, while those who tried to heed them sometimes postponed their deaths, though never truly escaping the shadow Edward cast. Determined to break the curse, Emily tracked down the long-forgotten post office where Edward worked. The building was decrepit, boarded up, and overgrown. Still, inside the basement, she found a rusted metal box filled with undelivered letters dated July 14, 1963. Among them was a letter addressed to a man named Harold Finch. Emily felt a chill as she carefully opened it, the fragile paper crumbling in her hands. The message inside was simple. Harold Finch, forgive and be forgiven, lest your soul be lost. Research revealed that Harold Finch had been Edward's bitter rival, another mailman who envied Edward's reputation. Their feud had turned violent, and on that cursed day, Harold had refused to accept a letter from Edward that might have ended their conflict peacefully. The storm that killed Edward had been a cosmic punishment for their unresolved enmity. Emily understood then that Edward's spirit was bound by unfinished grudges and lost chances. To free the town, she needed to deliver those letters herself, overcoming decades of silence and fear. Night after night, Emily sifted through the letters, delivering each to homes long abandoned or to descendants who carried the weight of forgotten sins. Some were angry at first, others fearful, but many found closure in the messages Edward had penned. One stormy evening, after delivering the last known letter to the grandson of Harold Finch, Emily returned to the post office basement. The air was thick with moisture and dust. On the wall, written in a faded script, was a final letter Edward had never sent, his confession and plea for forgiveness. As Emily read aloud the words, a gust of wind swept through the basement. The shadows seemed to pull away, the air grew warmer, and the oppressive presence that had hung over Elmswood lifted. From that night on, the letters stopped arriving. The mailboxes were silent, the mailman's footsteps no longer echoed on the streets. Yet some say if you walk Old Oak Road just before dawn, in the thickest fog, you can still glimpse a shadowy figure, mailbag slung over his shoulder, delivering letters with a slow, patient dignity. And the townsfolk, forever changed, always check their mailboxes with trembling hands, wondering if tonight will be the night when the mailman still delivers, always. For more stories, like and subscribe.